Derek Vaughn grabbed Ethan by the collar with both hands, slammed him into the metal shelving, and put his face 3 inches away. "You think I don't know where your daughter goes to school?" The warehouse went dead silent. 6 men, 1 exit, and a father who had not thrown a punch in 4 years, not because he forgot how, but because he had promised himself he never would again. Derek was still grinning when Ethan's hand closed around his wrist. The grin lasted exactly 1 more second. What happened in that parking lot after midnight would be recorded on a cell phone, watched by 3 million people, and talked about in Crestwood, Oregon, for the next 20 years. But none of those people knew what Derek Vaughn never bothered to find out before he walked through that door. The quiet man he had chosen to humiliate had spent 11 years building the most dangerous soldiers in the United States military. He had picked the wrong father. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. And if you're new here, subscribe, because you are not going to want to miss what comes next. The town of Crestwood, Oregon, sat on a strip of coastline that nobody famous had ever bothered to visit. It had a diner, a bait shop, a hardware store that had been losing money since 1987, and a waterfront that smelled like diesel and low tide. In the summer, a handful of tourists would wander through and take photographs of the fishing boats. By September, the place went quiet again, and the locals went back to being exactly who they were. Ethan Walker had chosen it for that reason. He had driven through Crestwood 4 years ago, with Mia asleep in the back seat, a 9-year-old curled up under a fleece blanket, with one arm around a stuffed whale that had lost most of its stuffing. He had pulled over at a gas station, looked at the quiet street, looked at the harbor, looked at the ordinary sky above an ordinary town, and thought, this is it. This is what she needs. Not him. Her. That was the distinction Ethan had made very clearly in his own mind in the months after he filed the paperwork and walked away from the career that had defined every year of his adult life. He had spent a long time doing things that were necessary. He had spent a long time being somewhere else. Now it was time to be here. To be the man standing in the kitchen when Mia came downstairs in the morning. To be the voice that said goodnight before she fell asleep. To be present in a way that duty had never allowed. Nobody in Crestwood knew what he had done before. That was intentional. He told people he had done some government contracting work, which was technically true. He said he had moved around a lot. Also true. He said he wanted a quieter life now. Completely true. What he didn't say was that he had spent 11 years inside the Navy SEAL training pipeline, first as an operator, then as one of the instructors who decided which candidates were ready and which ones went home. He had trained men who went on to do things that would never appear in any newspaper. He had designed survival and combat scenarios that pushed human beings to the absolute edge of what was physically and psychologically possible. He had seen men who looked like action heroes quit on the first day. And he had seen men who looked like accountants dig down to something nobody knew they had and become extraordinary. He knew exactly what violence looked like. He knew exactly what it cost. He had decided it was not going to be any part of Mia's childhood. So Ethan Walker became invisible on purpose. He took the job at the Portside Logistics warehouse because the night shift paid a modest premium and left his days free. He could drop Mia at Crestwood Elementary at 7:45 in the morning. Come home, sleep for 6 hours, be awake when she got off the bus at 3:15, and be fully present for the 6 hours that mattered most. He cooked dinner every night, real food, not frozen things, because his grandmother had told him once that cooking for someone was the most direct form of love there was, and he had never stopped believing that. He helped with homework. He went to every parent-teacher conference. He sat in the bleachers at every school event, and cheered the way fathers cheer when they know their daughter is watching for them in the crowd. He was by any measure a very ordinary man living a very ordinary life. His supervisor at Portside, a heavy-set man named Raymond Chu, who had managed night shift operations for 22 years, had told Ethan once that he was the most reliable employee the warehouse had ever had. "You show up, you don't complain, you fix things before I even know they're broken." Raymond had said, genuinely puzzled by this, as if it were unusual. "Where'd you work before this?" "Here and there," Ethan had said. Raymond had nodded slowly, the way people do when they sense there is a longer answer that they are not going to receive. That was as far as any conversation about Ethan's past ever went. The Wednesday evening that everything changed started like every other Wednesday. Mia came home from school with a project about ocean ecosystems that was due Friday, and she had opinions about how the presentation should be structured that she delivered at full volume while dumping her backpack on the kitchen table. "I want to do it on bioluminescent creatures," she announced, "because they make their own light, which is the most interesting thing anything can do." "I agree," Ethan said. He was standing at the stove watching onions in a pan. "Most of the kids are doing dolphins or whales because those are the obvious choices." "Are you worried about the obvious choices?" Mia made a face that clearly communicated her feelings about that question. "I'm going to do anglerfish and firefly squid and ostracods." Ostracods are tiny crustaceans that make blue light clouds in the water when a predator is coming. They make light clouds to warn other ostracods, or to confuse the predator. Scientists aren't entirely sure which. "You're going to do great," Ethan said. She sat down at the table, opened her notebook, and began organizing her thoughts in the methodical, slightly obsessive way she had been doing since she was 5. And Ethan stood at the stove and cooked dinner and listened to her talk. And it was a completely normal Wednesday evening, which is what he had been working toward for 4 years. At 9:30. He kissed her on the top of her head, told her the anglerfish presentation was going to be exceptional, turned off her light, and drove to Portside Logistics. He did not know that Derek Vaughn had chosen that night. Portside Logistics occupied a large industrial building at the edge of the harbor district, the kind of place that stored other people's merchandise and processed other people's inventory, and existed largely without being noticed. The night shift was Ethan and 2 other employees, a young man named Calvin, who was saving money for college, and a woman named Diane, who had worked at Portside for 9 years and had an extremely strong sense of order. At approximately 11:15 p.m., a black SUV and a gray pickup truck pulled into the Portside loading area. Derek Vaughn came in first. He was 29 years old, broad-shouldered, in the way that happens when a person lifts weights, recreationally, but has never been tested with the particular confidence that belongs to someone who has never faced a consequence he couldn't make go away. His father, Gerald Vaughn, owned 7 commercial properties in and around Crestwood, including 2 of the buildings that Portside subcontracted storage space from. Derek had grown up watching his father use that ownership as leverage. He had been learning that lesson his whole life. Behind him came 5 men. They ranged in age from early 20s to mid-30s. They had the posture of people who had decided violence was a career option. One of them, a large man named Trent, who walked with his arms slightly away from his sides, carried a length of steel pipe wrapped in a shop rag. Calvin saw them come in and immediately understood that something was wrong. He glanced at Ethan. Ethan had already seen them. He was standing near the inventory station with a clipboard, and he had taken in all 6 of them in the same unhurried way that other people take in a room when they walk into a party. He set the clipboard down. Derek looked around the warehouse with the proprietary ease of someone who is accustomed to treating other people's spaces as his own. He picked up a small box from the nearest shelf, examined it with exaggerated curiosity, then dropped it on the floor. "Help you," Ethan said. "Just checking the place out," Derek said. He wandered further into the warehouse. 2 of the men behind him spread out to the sides without being told, to a kind of casual blocking motion that was meant to communicate that the exits were covered. "You the manager tonight?" "I am. My dad has an interest in this operation, financial interest. I like to make sure his investments are being taken care of. I can give you the owner's contact information if you'd like to discuss a business matter." Derek smiled. It was the smile of a man who has used it before to watch other people get nervous. "I'm talking to you. You're here, right? You're the guy." Ethan said nothing. He was watching all 6 of them simultaneously, which is something that sounds difficult, but becomes automatic after enough training. He was calculating. Distance. Position. The pipe in Trent's hand. The pocket where one of the other men kept touching his jacket. The body language of the one standing closest to the shelving units on the far wall, who looked like he was working himself up to something. "Hey," Derek said. He had moved closer, cutting the distance between them. "You look like you're running math in your head. Relax. This is a friendly conversation." "What do you want?" Ethan asked. "Want." Derek tilted his head as if the word amused him. "That's direct. I like that. Let's say I want you to understand that this part of town functions a certain way. Business owners, warehouse managers, people who work in this district, they all eventually come to understand that there are costs to operating here. Protection, maintenance, community goodwill." He paused. "You following me?" "You're describing extortion," Ethan said. Something flickered in Derek's face. Not anger, not yet. More like surprise that the word had been used. Most people in his experience preferred not to name it. Naming it made the conversation awkward, and also revealed that the person on the other end was not going to pretend the situation was something it wasn't. "That's a pretty harsh word," Derek said. "It's the accurate word." Calvin had taken 3 steps backward toward the interior office. Diane had stopped moving entirely and was standing very still, which Ethan noted was actually the right instinct. "Don't move toward them. Don't run. Don't give them anything to react to." Derek turned and looked at Calvin with a kind of theatrical disappointment. "Hey, kid, where are you going?" Calvin froze. "Come back. Nobody's leaving." Derek turned back to Ethan. "Here's what I think happens. I think we have a productive conversation. I think you understand the reality of your situation. And I think next week whoever owns this place makes a modest arrangement with my dad's company and everybody's happy." "That's not going to happen," Ethan said. "You need to leave." Something changed in the air. It was subtle, the kind of shift that most people would feel without being able to name it. The 5 men behind Derek all moved slightly, a collective adjustment in stance that communicated readiness. "You know," Derek said, and his voice had dropped slightly, the friendliness replaced by something that was meant to sound dangerous. "Most guys in your position, when they see 6 people walk through the door, they get a little more cooperative. It's a natural human instinct, self-preservation." "I'm going to call the police now," Ethan said. "When they arrive, you should have a lawyer ready because there are cameras in this building." "Oh, the cameras," Derek said. He nodded at the man nearest the wall. The man reached up and pulled the nearest camera housing off its bracket and dropped it on the floor. "I noticed those." Ethan reached for his phone. "You can make that call," Derek said, moving between Ethan and the office. "They'll get here in 20 minutes? Crestwood's not exactly jumping at midnight. 20 minutes is a long time." He paused. "That long enough for us to have a real conversation." Ethan made the call anyway. He said his location said there were 6 individuals trespassing and threatening employees, and said he would stay on the line. Then he put the phone in his shirt pocket with the line open. Derek watched this with genuine amusement. "Smart," he said. "You want a record. I respect that." Then one of the men, the younger one near the back, who had been working himself up, moved to the shelving unit and shoved it. Boxes cascaded onto the floor. He shoved a second one. Then he picked up a standing lamp from the corner of the office area and threw it through the glass partition. Diane made a sound that was halfway between a gasp and a scream. "Stop," Ethan said. His voice was very quiet. Not louder than before, not tighter, not higher. Exactly the same pitch and volume as everything else he had said all night. That quality, the absolute stillness of it, was the first thing that made Derek pause. "Everybody relax," Derek said, mostly to his own men, not to Ethan. He was watching Ethan's face. "This is just emphasis." He looked back at Ethan. "Property can be replaced. People are more complicated. You need to stop what you're doing right now," Ethan said. "Or what?" Derek walked toward him. 3 feet, 2 feet, standing close enough that he was clearly in what most people would understand as threatening proximity. "You going to do something big move for a warehouse worker?" That was when Derek reached into Ethan's jacket pocket. Not aggressively, almost casually, as if he had decided to demonstrate that personal space did not apply to him. He found the wallet, flipped it open. The photograph was there. Mia's school picture from last year. She was wearing a yellow sweater and smiling the way kids smile when the photographer says smile, slightly self-conscious, showing all her teeth. Derek held it up. "Sweet kid," he said, and he was grinning now. Be a shame if her daddy couldn't come home one night. The thing that would later strike Calvin, and that he would describe to 3 separate police officers in 3 separate interviews, was what Ethan did not do. He did not lunge at Derek. He did not raise his voice. His face did not contort with rage. What happened was quieter, and Calvin would say somehow far more frightening. Ethan looked at the photograph. He looked at Derek's grin. He looked briefly at each of the 5 other men in the room. And then something in his posture shifted. Not dramatically. It was the difference between a door that is closed and a door that is unlocked. The door was still closed, but it wasn't closed the same way anymore. Put that back, Ethan said. Derek waggled the photograph. What this? I'm just making a point, man. This is about understanding stakes. You want to be the tough guy, you stand here, and you lecture me about extortion, and I'm just trying to help you understand that there are things more important than principles, like little girls in yellow sweaters. I'm going to ask you once more, Ethan said, or put it back. Derek stared at him for 3 full seconds. Then he dropped the photograph on the floor, not into Ethan's hand, but down onto the dirty concrete. Ethan bent and picked it up. He put it back in his wallet. He put his wallet in his pocket. Then he looked at Derek and said, "The police are on their way. You should go." Derek studied him. That calculation was visible on his face. He had come here expecting fear or anger or capitulation, and he had gotten none of those things. The man in front of him was standing in the same place he had been standing when they arrived, with the same expression on his face, like someone who was waiting for a bus. It unsettled Derek. Not enough to make him leave, but enough. "We'll be back," Derek said. "I know," Ethan said. The police arrived 17 minutes after the call. 2 officers younger than Ethan who walked through the warehouse and took statements with the careful neutrality of people doing their jobs in a situation where the law was clear, but the social reality was complicated. The younger officer, whose name was Reyes, pulled Ethan aside. "You know who his father is?" "I've heard the name. Gerald Vaughn owns half the commercial property in this district, including some of the buildings your company leases." "I'm aware." Reyes looked at his notepad. "We can file the trespassing report. Destruction of property. The cameras were disabled, so I had my phone open. The call is recorded." Reyes nodded slowly. "That's good. But I want to be straight with you. These guys have been through here before. 2 businesses in this district paid them. 1 business filed a complaint and then withdrew it 6 weeks later. I'm not telling you to do anything. I'm telling you how this usually goes." "How do you think it's going to go this time?" Ethan asked. Reyes looked at him for a moment. Something in Ethan's manner made the officer feel like he was talking to someone with more experience of difficult situations than his warehouse uniform suggested. "Honestly, I don't know," Reyes said. "You seem like you're handling this better than most people would." "I had a long night," Ethan said. After the officers left, Calvin approached Ethan with the look of a young man who wants to say something and isn't sure how. "They're coming back, aren't they?" "Probably," Ethan said. "What are we going to do?" "You and Diane are going to go home. Tonight is done." Calvin looked at him. "What about you?" "I have some things to take care of," Ethan said. He walked to the office, made sure the logs were accurate, noted the damaged inventory for the insurance report, and set up the backup camera system that Raymond didn't know about because Ethan had installed it himself 2 months ago after noticing that the neighborhood was shifting. Then he sat down in the office chair and thought about Mia upstairs and about the look on Derek Vaughn's face when he held up that photograph and about the drop in his voice when he said what he said. Ethan had spent 11 years evaluating threats. He knew the difference between theater and genuine intention. He knew the difference between someone who wanted to scare you and someone who would actually follow through. Derek Vaughn was young and reckless and accustomed to winning, which made him more dangerous than someone cautious. A cautious man calculates his exposure. A man who has never faced a real consequence doesn't know where the line is. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a contact he hadn't used in almost 2 years. The name in his phone just said Hayes. He held the phone for a long moment. Then he put it back in his pocket. He could handle this. At 1:30 in the morning, Ethan went upstairs. The office building adjacent to the warehouse had a second floor that had been used for storage until Ethan had quietly, over the course of several months, cleared it out and made it into something functional. Raymond had noticed, but not asked questions, mostly because the result was clean and organized, and Raymond appreciated both. There was a cot, a lamp, a bookshelf, a small bathroom. On nights when the shift ran late or the paperwork was complicated, Ethan sometimes slept there rather than driving home. On the nights when Mia was having a hard week, when the anxiety that periodically surfaced in her would make sleep difficult, she would sometimes come to the warehouse with him and sleep in the small room while he worked below, and he found that being near him was often the only thing that helped. Tonight, Mia was there. Her teacher had called in the afternoon about the project, and Ethan had mentioned that he was working tonight, and Mia had asked, in the careful way she had of asking for things she wasn't sure she was allowed to want, "Can I come? I can work on my project while you work. I won't be any trouble." She was never any trouble. She was asleep on the cot now, her notebook open on the floor beside her, the anglerfish sketches she'd been working on still visible in the lamplight. The stuffed whale was tucked under her arm. She was breathing the slow, even way of a child who was completely certain she was safe. Ethan stood in the doorway and watched her sleep. 11 years he had spent in environments where safety was provisional and violence was professional, and the mission was always larger than any individual. He had been good at it. He had been, if he was honest with himself, exceptionally good at it. He had understood in some fundamental way the grammar of dangerous situations, the way a musician understands harmony, not as a rule, but as a felt thing, a second nature. He had walked away from all of that for the girl with the stuffed whale. I was not going to let anything touch her. He went back downstairs. At 2:07 a.m., the sound of breaking glass came from the parking lot. Ethan was at the inventory station. He heard it, and he was on his feet before the sound finished, moving toward the monitor that connected to the backup camera system, the one Derek's man had not found. The parking lot feed showed the gray pickup truck. Both vehicles. All 6 of them back, moving differently now, with purpose, with the momentum of men who had been waiting and drinking and working themselves into the particular state of mind where actions become easy. Trent was swinging the steel pipe at the rear window of Ethan's truck. 2 others had crowbars. A third had a can of something and was moving toward the warehouse's side entrance, the 6th man. Derek was standing apart from the others, directing, not participating, which told Ethan something about how Derek thought of himself. He was the architect. The others were the tools. Ethan went upstairs. He sat on the edge of the cot and put his hand on Mia's shoulder. She woke the way she always did, immediately alert, her eyes finding his face. "Dad." "Hey, sweetheart, I need you to do something for me." She sat up. She read his face because she had always been able to read his face, even when he thought he wasn't showing anything. "What's happening?" "Those men from earlier came back. Everything's fine, but I need you to stay in this room and lock the door and not open it until I come back and knock 3 times. 3 knocks. You count them." "Dad, I need you to trust me right now. Can you do that?" She looked at him for a long moment. She was 9 years old, and she understood that her father had a capacity for calm that exceeded what was normal, and she had always known somewhere beneath conscious thought that there was something about him she didn't fully know. "Are you going to be okay?" she asked. "Yes. Promise." "I promise." He squeezed her hand. 3 knocks. She nodded. She got off the cot, and he watched her go to the door and lock it. Then he heard the scrape of the old wooden chair being dragged and wedged under the handle, because that was Mia always thinking one step further. He went back downstairs. He put on his jacket. He walked to the side exit. He pushed open the door and walked out into the parking lot. Derek was standing about 30 feet away, backlit by the parking lot lights, and he turned when he heard the door open. His expression moved through surprise to something that was trying to be amusement. "Well," Derek said. "Couldn't stay inside, huh?" Ethan looked at the truck. The rear window was gone. Both taillights shattered. The side panel was dented in a pattern that suggested multiple deliberate strikes. He looked at Trent with the pipe. He looked at the man with the crowbar, who had moved to the warehouse's main door. He looked at the one with the can who had paused. He looked at Derek. "You've made a significant mistake," Ethan said. "I'm giving you one opportunity to understand that and to leave." Derek laughed. It was a genuine laugh, not a performance. He was genuinely entertained by this. He was genuinely certain of how this was going to go. "Look at you," Derek said, spreading his arms. "You came outside. You're giving me speeches." He glanced at his men, inviting them to share the joke. "Man, I thought you were smart. I thought you understood how this works." "You have no idea who you're dealing with," Ethan said. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Derek said, taking 3 steps forward. "I'm dealing with a warehouse worker who thinks—" "My name is Ethan Walker," Ethan said. "For 11 years, I trained Navy SEALs. I designed the combat and survival curricula for 2 SEAL teams. I have been in situations that you do not have the frame of reference to imagine. I am telling you clearly that what you are doing right now will not end the way you think it will." The parking lot went quiet. Derek stared at him, and then he laughed again, louder this time. "Oh, that's good. That's actually good. I trained Navy SEALs. You rehearse that." Ethan said nothing. "You ready?" Derek called to his men. All 5 of them moved, and Ethan Walker stopped being invisible. The first thing Ethan did after the police left was not call anyone. He did not pace the warehouse floor. He did not stand at the window watching the parking lot. He went upstairs, knocked 3 times on the locked door, waited for Mia to drag the chair away, and when she opened the door, he pulled her into a hug that lasted longer than his hugs usually did. She let him. She was 9 years old, and she understood without being told that her father needed that moment more than she did. "They're gone," she asked into his shoulder. "They're gone." "Are they coming back?" He pulled back and looked at her face. She was watching him with those eyes that had always been too old for her age, the eyes of a child who had learned early that the world was not always safe, and that the most honest thing an adult could do was not pretend otherwise. "I don't know," he said. "But you're safe. That's the only thing that matters right now." She studied him for another second, then nodded, the way she nodded when she had decided to accept an answer, even if it wasn't complete. She went back to her cot. She picked up her notebook. She started drawing anglerfish again because Mia Walker processed fear the same way she processed everything else, by focusing on something real and knowable and hers. Ethan stood in the doorway and watched her for a long moment. Then he went back to work. Raymond Chu arrived at 7 the next morning and stood in the middle of the warehouse, looking at the broken camera, housing on the floor, and the shattered glass partition, and the toppled shelving units, with the expression of a man whose 22 years of incident-free management had just ended. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said. Ethan told him. All of it without editorializing the way he had been trained to deliver situation reports. Factual, sequential, complete. Raymond listened without interrupting. When Ethan finished, Raymond was quiet for almost a full minute. "Derek Vaughn," Raymond finally said. "You know him." "I know his father." Raymond sat down heavily in the office chair. "Gerald Vaughn owns the building 2 blocks east of here, the one we use for overflow storage. He raised our lease rate 3 times in 4 years. He rubbed his face. "I've heard things about the son. Didn't think he'd come this far." "He did," Ethan said. "The police report. What did they say?" "They took the statement. They were honest with me about what usually happens." Raymond looked at him. "Meaning?" "Meaning most businesses in this situation eventually pay." Raymond was quiet again. Outside, the morning harbor sounds were starting up the distant crank of machinery, the low horn of a vessel somewhere out on the water. Normal sounds. The sound of a town that did not know what had happened in this building last night. "I'm not paying," Raymond said. "Good," Ethan said. "But I need to know this isn't going to happen again. I've got 3 employees on nights and I can't—" He stopped. He looked at Ethan more carefully than he usually did. "You handled yourself last night. The way you describe it, 6 guys in here and you kept your head." "I called the police and kept the situation from escalating," Ethan said carefully. "That's more than most people would do." Raymond kept looking at him. Is there something about your background I should know? Ethan met his eyes. I've been in difficult situations before. Raymond held his gaze for 3 seconds, then nodded slowly. The same nod as always, the one that meant he understood there was more and had decided not to push. I'm going to call the owner, and I'm going to call a lawyer, and I'm going to need you to write up everything you told me in a formal incident report. Already done, Ethan said. He handed Raymond 3 pages of clean, detailed notes. Times, names, descriptions, sequence of events. The recording from my phone is backed up to 2 locations. Raymond took the pages and looked at them. Then he looked at Ethan again. You prepared this last night. This morning, before you got here. Raymond shook his head slowly, not in disapproval, in something that was closer to disbelief. Go home, he said. Get some sleep, come back tonight. Ethan drove Mia to school on the way home. She sat in the passenger seat of his truck, the one with the shattered rear window that he had taped over with a garbage bag, and she looked at the plastic sheeting rattling in the wind, and then looked at him, but did not ask. At the school drop-off, she gathered her backpack, then paused with one hand on the door. Dad, she said. Yeah. Those men. Are they the kind of men who don't stop? He considered lying. He considered the comfortable, protective untruth that would send her into school without anything extra to carry. He looked at her face and understood, as he had understood since she was very small, that she always knew when he was doing that. Some men are like that, he said. But I want you to hear me. Whatever happens, you are not in danger. I will not let anything happen to you. That is not a thing I say. It is a thing I will do. Do you understand the difference? She thought about it. You mean it's not a feeling? It's a plan. That's exactly what I mean. She nodded. She got out of the truck. At the door of the school, she turned and looked back at him, and he raised one hand, and she went inside. He sat in the parking lot for a moment, with both hands on the wheel. Then he drove home, and did not sleep. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and his phone, and he did something he had not done in 2 years. He started making calls. The first one was to a man named Garrett, who had been a training candidate under Ethan 7 years ago and was now running private security consultation out of Portland. Garrett answered on the second ring. Walker, Garrett said. Been a while. It has. I need some information on a man named Gerald Vaughn, commercial real estate Crestwood area, and his son Derek. I need to know the scope of what I'm dealing with. There was a pause on Garrett's end. Not the pause of someone who was confused, but the pause of someone who was recalibrating. You need information or you need help. Information first. How fast? Today would be good. Another pause. You okay? I'm fine. This is a professional inquiry. Right, Garrett said, and his tone communicated that he did not entirely believe this, but was going to respect it anyway. I'll get back to you in a few hours. The second call was harder. He stared at the contact for a long time before he pressed it. Captain Laura Hayes picked up on the fourth ring, and her voice had the particular alertness of someone who had spent so many years in environments where a call at an unusual time meant something significant that it had become her permanent mode. Ethan. Laura. It's been almost 2 years. I know. You only call when something has happened or something is about to happen. Something has happened, he said. He told her, briefer than he had told Raymond because Hayes understood context quickly and did not need it reconstructed. He gave her the names, the situation, the assessment of Derek Vaughn's intentions, and his read on the level of risk. Hayes was quiet for a moment when he finished. Your read on escalation. High. He came back the same night. He's not testing. He's committed. And Mia? She's at school. She's fine. Ethan. Hayes's voice shifted slightly, not softer, but more direct, the way it shifted when she was going to say something that mattered. You know what I'm going to ask. I know. Are you ready, if it goes that direction? The question sat in the kitchen with him. The morning light was coming through the window over the sink, falling on the coffee cup on the table where Mia did her homework, on the chair where she sat every evening and talked to him about bioluminescent creatures and the things that made their own light in the dark. "I've been ready for 4 years," he said. "I just hoped I wouldn't have to be." "That's not the same thing as ready," Hayes said. "No," he agreed. "But it'll do." Garrett called back at noon with more than Ethan had expected. Gerald Vaughn was not simply a landlord with an aggressive son. Gerald Vaughn was a man who had built his commercial real estate portfolio through a very specific combination of legitimate business practices and the kind of informal leverage that was never written down anywhere. 3 businesses in the Crestwood Harbor District had quietly settled disputes with Vaughn Properties in the last 5 years. 2 city council members had received campaign contributions from a holding company that traced back to Vaughn. The local planning commission had approved 3 Vaughn development projects in 4 years, all 3 of which had faced significant community opposition that had somehow dissolved before the final vote. Derek was the operations enforcement arm. He had 2 prior incidents on record, both misdemeanors, both resolved in ways that suggested intervention from people who knew the right people. He had a crew of 5 regular associates who had collectively accumulated enough police contact to constitute a professional history. None of them had done serious time, which meant they had either been lucky or been protected. Probably both. "This is not a kid throwing his weight around," Garrett said. "This is a family business model. The son creates the fear, the father collects the benefit. They've been running this for at least 6 years. "Any violence on record?" Ethan asked. "One incident, 18 months ago. A restaurant owner in the district filed a complaint, then withdrew it. He sold his business 3 months later and moved out of the county." "Okay, Ethan, these are not amateurs. They have infrastructure. They have relationships with people who make things go away." "I know." "What are you going to do?" "What I need to do," Ethan said. He went to the school that afternoon and picked Mia up himself, which he only did on Wednesdays and Fridays, and she noticed immediately because she noticed everything. "You didn't sleep," she said, climbing into the truck. "I worked on some things." "About last night?" "Yes." She put her seatbelt on. She looked out the window at the school parking lot. "My teacher, Mrs. Patterson, asked if everything was okay because she said I seemed distracted." "What did you tell her?" "I said I had a lot on my mind. She said that was very mature." Mia paused. "I didn't tell her about the men." "Thank you for that." "I didn't know if I should." "You made the right call." They drove in silence for a while through the quiet streets that Ethan had chosen 4 years ago for their quietness, past the hardware store and the diner and the bait shop, through a town that still felt in the afternoon light exactly as ordinary as it had always been. "Dad," Mia said. "Yeah." "When something is happening that's dangerous, and you know it's dangerous, but you can't really do anything about it, yet what do you do, like in your head?" I thought about that for a moment. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because he wanted to give her the real one. "You focus on what you can control," he said. "Right now, today, this hour. You do the thing in front of you as well as you can do it, and you trust that you've prepared for the rest. And if you haven't prepared, then you prepare faster," he said. She was quiet for another minute. Then, "I finished the anglerfish slides." "Yeah. They're really good, Dad. I think they're the best thing I've made." "I believe it. Will you look at them tonight before I go to school tomorrow?" "First thing," he said. They came back that evening, not to the warehouse, to the street outside the house. Ethan was in the kitchen washing dishes when he saw the headlights. A vehicle moving slowly past. No reason to move that slowly on a residential street. No stops to make, just a slow roll that was designed to be seen. He stood at the window with his hands still in the soapy water and watched the pickup go by. He counted the silhouettes through the cab window. 3. He dried his hands. He went to the living room where Mia was on the couch with her notebook, and he sat down next to her and spent 45 minutes looking at the bioluminescent creature presentation, asking questions and listening to her answers and laughing at the joke she had included about anglerfish mating, which was, she explained with great seriousness, one of the most bizarre biological processes in the known world. After she was asleep, he went to his phone. He called Officer Reyes. "They drove past my house tonight," he said. Slowly. 3 of them visible in the cab. Reyes was quiet for a moment. You get a plate. I got a plate. He read it out. I'll run it. Ethan, listen. This is becoming a different kind of situation. When they came to the warehouse, that's one thing. When they come to where you live, where your kid lives. I know what it is, Ethan said. Is there somewhere you and your daughter could stay for a few days while we work through the— No. The word was flat and final, not angry, just completely certain. Reyes was quiet for another moment. Okay, I hear you. I'm going to increase patrol in your area tonight, but I have to be honest with you. We don't have the manpower to. I know. Thank you for the honesty. Call me if anything happens. Anything. Middle of the night doesn't matter. I will. He hung up. He sat in the kitchen for a while in the dark, not afraid. Fear was not the thing he was feeling. Fear would have been simpler. What he felt was closer to grief, the specific grief of a man who had believed he had successfully put something behind him and was now watching it walk back through the door. He had been prepared to be a father. He had not wanted to have to be anything else. The next 3 days moved with the particular tension of a situation that everyone involved knows is temporary. Derek did not come to the warehouse. He did not drive past the house again. The pickup truck did not appear on Ethan's street. The crew went quiet in a way that felt deliberate, the way a storm system goes quiet before it reorganizes. Ethan did not mistake the quiet for resolution. He talked to Raymond every day. Raymond had spoken to a lawyer who had confirmed that the recording from Ethan's phone was usable, that the trespassing and destruction of property charges were solid, but that pursuing them aggressively in civil court would take months, and in the meantime would likely provoke exactly the kind of response that everyone wanted to avoid. He's basically telling me to absorb it, Raymond said on the phone. The lawyer. He's saying the path of least resistance is to see if they go away. They won't go away, Ethan said. I know. Raymond sounded tired. The owner called me this morning. He's nervous. He doesn't want trouble with the Vaughns because they have relationships with people in the city that affect his other properties. What did you tell him? I told him I'd handle it. A pause. I don't know how to handle it. Keep the lawyer on retainer. Make sure the insurance claim is filed. Document everything that happens, every day. And the physical situation. I'll handle the physical situation, Ethan said. There was a silence on Raymond's end. Ethan, what does that mean? It means I know what I'm doing, Ethan said. On the 4th day, Ethan got a call from a number he didn't recognize. He answered it anyway. Mr. Walker. The voice was older, controlled, the voice of a man who was accustomed to speaking and being listened to. My name is Gerald Vaughn. I think it would be beneficial for us to have a conversation. Ethan said nothing. I understand there was an incident at your workplace earlier this week, Gerald continued. I want to apologize for that. My son can be impulsive. He means well, but he sometimes lacks the judgment that comes with experience. He threatened my daughter, Ethan said. A brief pause, not a guilty pause, a calculating one. I understand that emotions ran high. I'm calling because I believe this situation has been handled poorly from the start, and I'd like the opportunity to reset, man to man. What does that mean? It means I'd like to meet with you, in person. Discuss this like adults. I think if we talk directly, we can find a resolution that works for everyone. Ethan looked out the window at the street. Quiet afternoon. A woman walking a dog on the sidewalk across the road. The ordinary surface of a day that had nothing wrong with it. Where, he said. My office, tomorrow morning, 11 o'clock. Gerald gave an address. Bring a lawyer if you'd like. This is a professional conversation. I'll be there, Ethan said. He hung up and immediately called Hayes. He wants a meeting, he told her. Of course he does, she said. What do you think the play is? He wants to assess me in person. Figure out how much I know. See if I can be managed. Can you be managed? No. Good. Go to the meeting. But Ethan. Her voice shifted again into that direct frequency. Don't go in hoping for a resolution. Go in gathering intelligence. That's why I'm going, he said. Gerald Vaughn's office was on the 3rd floor of a building he owned, which struck Ethan as the kind of detail that communicated exactly how Gerald thought about himself. The office had the deliberate comfort of a room designed to make visitors feel that the man behind the desk had more than they did. Better furniture, better view, better options. Gerald himself was 61, silver-haired, with the build of a man who had once been athletic and had let it soften into something that still carried authority. He stood when Ethan came in and offered his hand across the desk and shook firmly the practiced handshake of a man who had used the handshake as an assessment tool for decades. Derek was in the room too, standing to the side wearing a jacket that was one level more formal than he would have chosen on his own. He looked like he had been told to be there and told to behave himself and was managing both with effort. "Thank you for coming," Gerald said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Can I get you anything?" "No," Ethan said. He sat down. He did not look at the view or the furniture. He looked at Gerald. "I'll get to the point," Gerald said, settling back in his chair with the ease of a man on his own territory. "My son made poor decisions earlier this week. He overstepped. The approach he used was counterproductive, and I don't condone it." A glance at Derek that had parental authority in it. "He knows that." Derek said nothing. His jaw was tight. "I appreciate that," Ethan said. "The underlying business conversation, the relationship between my properties and the businesses that operate in this district, that's a legitimate subject. There are real costs to maintaining safe, functional commercial space, and it's not unreasonable for those costs to be shared across the businesses that benefit from." "You're describing the same arrangement your son described," Ethan said. In more professional language, Gerald held his gaze, a slight smile. "I'm describing a legal business arrangement. Your son destroyed property. He threatened my employees. He made a specific threat against my daughter by name." Ethan paused. "I have the recording." Gerald's expression did not change significantly, but something behind it shifted. Just slightly. The recalibration of a man who has encountered more resistance than he expected. A recording can be interpreted in many ways. "The video from Derek's associate's phone is harder to interpret," Ethan said. Now the shift was more visible. Derek straightened slightly in his peripheral vision. "What video?" Gerald said. "One of your son's friends was recording on his phone. From what I understand, it captures the entirety of the incident inside the warehouse, including the threat about my daughter." Ethan looked at Gerald steadily. "I don't think you knew about the recording." Gerald looked at Derek. Derek's jaw worked once. "I didn't know Cody had his—" "Enough," Gerald said. Quiet, controlled. The single word of a man who had been managing Derek's mistakes for a long time. The room was very still for a moment. "What is it that you want, Mr. Walker?" Gerald said. His voice had changed. The smoothness was still there, but underneath it was something more direct. Now the sound of a man who had decided that the social layer of this conversation was no longer productive. "I want the harassment to stop," Ethan said. "Completely. The warehouse, my home, my daughter's school, any property or person associated with me. Done. No further contact. And in exchange, the recording stays where it is. The police report stays on file, but I don't push for prosecution." Gerald looked at him for a long moment. The calculation was visible, not the math of a man doing something wrong, but the math of a man deciding whether this particular version of a compromise was in his interest. "And if we can't come to that agreement," Gerald said, "then the recording goes to the district attorney's office and to 3 journalists I've already identified who have been investigating your property business relationships with city officials for the better part of 2 years. Ethan paused. "I'm not threatening you, Mr. Vaughn. I'm telling you the state of the situation." Something passed between Gerald and Derek that was too complicated to be called a look. It was the communication of 2 people who share a long history and a shared vulnerability, and who both understand in the same moment that the ground has shifted. Gerald set both hands flat on his desk. A deliberate motion. A man placing a period at the end of a sentence. "I think we can come to an agreement," he said. Derek made a sound. It was barely a sound. Barely anything. Just a shift of breath that wanted to be an objection and understood it couldn't be. Ethan looked at him then, directly, for the first time since he had walked into this room. Derek met his eyes for exactly 2 seconds and then looked away. Ethan stood up. "I'll expect confirmation in writing," he said, "through your attorney to mine, within 72 hours. He walked out of the office, down the stairs, out of the building, and into the afternoon where the harbor was doing what the harbor always did, moving and gray and indifferent. The way things that have been there forever are indifferent to the small urgencies of human beings. He sat in his truck and he called Hayes. "How did it go?" she asked. "The father is a businessman," Ethan said. "He'll honor an agreement if the cost-benefit works in his favor." "And the son?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. "The son is a different problem," he said. He was right. The written confirmation from Gerald's attorney arrived in 68 hours, well-worded and complete, and Raymond's lawyer reviewed it and said it was legitimate and enforceable. Raymond called Ethan sounding like a man who had just watched a storm pass his window without hitting the house. "I don't know how you did that," Raymond said. "Leverage," Ethan said. "However you did it, thank you." Ethan said he was glad it was resolved. He did not tell Raymond that he had sat in the portside parking lot every night for the 3 days since the meeting, not on the clock, just present, because the instinct that had kept him alive through 11 years of training the most dangerous men in the world was telling him something that Gerald Vaughn's attorney's letter did not fully address. Derek Vaughn had sat in that office and watched his father make a deal with the man he had publicly humiliated, publicly threatened, publicly underestimated. Derek had watched his father calculate the cost of his son's behavior and decide it was worth managing. Derek had stood there in his too formal jacket and said nothing because he knew the room and knew the dynamic and knew that his father's voice in that particular register was not a voice that invited argument. But Derek was 29 years old and he had never faced a consequence. He hadn't found a way to reframe as someone else's fault. The warehouse. The photograph. The parking lot. In Derek's version of that night, he had not lost anything. He had simply been interrupted, and the man who had interrupted him was walking around Crestwood, Oregon, taking his daughter to school and cooking dinner and working night shifts as if nothing had happened. As if Derek Vaughn were a problem that had been solved. Ethan knew how men like Derek thought about that. He also knew something else. He knew that a man who threatens a child, even in theater, even as leverage, even wrapped in the language of business, has already crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. He had revealed what he was willing to reach for. And a man willing to reach for that, when he was comfortable and in control, would reach for it again when he felt cornered. So Ethan waited. He watched Mia's presentation on bioluminescent creatures and told her it was the best thing he had ever seen, which was not an exaggeration. He cooked dinner. He helped with homework. He listened to her talk about ostracods and the way they made light in the dark water when something dangerous was coming. He showed up for every ordinary moment fully the way he had promised himself he would. And he waited. On a Tuesday night, 10 days after the meeting in Gerald Vaughn's office, Ethan was at portside running the inventory count when his phone lit up with a notification from the backup camera system he had installed at the house. Motion detected. Front perimeter. He pulled up the feed. 2 figures. Moving along the side fence line at the edge of his property. Moving slowly. Not running, not hesitating. Moving with the deliberateness of people who had decided what they were going to do before they arrived. I was already moving toward the door when his phone rang. The number was Mia's. She had a cell phone for exactly this kind of situation, and the protocol he had drilled into her was simple. If anything feels wrong, call immediately and get to the interior bathroom on the 2nd floor and lock the door. He picked up before the first ring finished. "Dad." Her voice was very quiet, controlled. She was scared, but she was holding it. She was so much braver than she knew. "Someone's outside. I can hear them on the side of the house." "You in the bathroom," he said. He was already in his truck. "Yes." "Door locked." "Yes." "Good girl. Stay on the phone. Do not open that door until I say so." He was already on the road. He drove the 7 minutes from portside to his house in 4. And in those 4 minutes, Mia stayed on the line steady and quiet, and he talked to her in the same even voice he used for everything, describing what he was doing, telling her where he was, giving her the sound of him moving toward her, because that was what she needed. He pulled onto his street with the headlights off. The two figures were still at the side of the house. A third was visible near the front, standing back from the porch watching the street. Ethan recognized the silhouette of the third one before he recognized anything else about him. Derek Vaughn had not honored his father's agreement for a single day, longer than it took to find a version of this that he could tell himself was different enough. Ethan parked a block away. He got out of the truck. He said very quietly into the phone, "Mia, I'm here. Everything is okay. Keep the door locked until I knock 3 times. Count them." 3, she whispered. "I'll be back in a few minutes," he said. He ended the call. He walked toward his house in the dark, and the feeling that moved through him was not anger, and it was not fear, and it was not the cold focus of professional necessity, though that was there too, underneath everything, steady and familiar and ready. What he felt walking toward 3 men who had come to his home and frightened his daughter in the middle of the night was the absolute and total clarity of a man who is done waiting. Derek didn't hear him coming. That was the first thing. That was the thing none of them expected, because men who are about to do something violent are focused on the target and not on the space around them, and Ethan had spent 11 years teaching people to never make that mistake. He came around the corner of the house from the east side, away from the streetlight, moving the way he had moved through 100 training scenarios and a dozen real ones, low and quiet and deliberate, and he was 6 feet from the man standing near the front porch before that man heard anything at all. The man turned and his mouth opened, and Ethan said very quietly, "Don't." Just that word. One word in a voice that had nothing in it except absolute certainty, and the man went completely still. His name was Cody. Ethan recognized him from the warehouse, the one who had been recording on his phone that first night, the one whose footage had given Ethan the leverage he had used in Gerald Vaughn's office 10 days ago. Cody was 24 years old, and he was realizing in real time that the situation he had driven here to participate in was not the situation he was currently in. "Where are the other 2?" Ethan said. Cody's eyes went to the side of the house. "Call them out," Ethan said. "Right now. Tell them to come to the front. Don't tell them anything else." Cody's voice came out thin and strange. Hey, come out front." The 2 men from the side of the house came around the corner and stopped when they saw Ethan standing next to Cody. One of them was Trent, the large one with the pipe from the first night at the warehouse. The pipe was in his hand again. The other was a man Ethan hadn't seen before, younger, maybe 22, with the look of someone who had been told this would be simple. Trent looked at Cody. Cody gave him nothing. "Where's Derek?" Ethan said. Nobody answered. "He sent 3 of you and stayed back," Ethan said. Not a question. He was reading the situation the way it was, not the way anyone was presenting it. "He does that. He's the architect. He doesn't participate." Trent shifted his grip on the pipe. It was a small movement, a preparatory movement, the kind that happens before someone decides to act, and Ethan saw it and spoke before the decision could complete itself. "Put the pipe down," Ethan said. "I'm not asking. I'm telling you what happens next if you don't." Trent said, "There's 3 of us." "There are," Ethan said. "That doesn't help you the way you think it does. Something in the way." He said it stopped Trent. Not the words. The complete absence of anything in his voice that resembled concern. Trent was a large man who had used his size to resolve disagreements for most of his adult life, and the men who didn't get nervous when he held the pipe were rare enough to be notable. "Last time," Ethan said. Trent set the pipe down on the ground. "Now," Ethan said, and his voice shifted into something that was almost conversational, almost patient, the voice of a man who has done this many times and finds the efficiency of it more useful than the drama. "I want all 3 of you to take out your phones. Hold them up so I can see them." They looked at each other. "Phones," Ethan said. They did it. 3 phones held up in the dark. "I'm going to give you each a number. You're going to call Derek and put it on speaker, and you're going to tell him to come here, right now." "He's not going to," Cody started. "He'll come," Ethan said. Because the alternative is that I call the police, and all three of you get booked tonight for trespassing and criminal threatening, and Derek gets to explain to his father why he violated a written legal agreement in under 2 weeks. He paused. Which phone has his number? Cody's hand lowered fractionally. Mine. Call him. Derek answered on the third ring with the tone of a man expecting a status update. What's happening? He's here, Cody said. His voice was doing something complicated. He wants you to come. Silence on the line. A full 4 seconds of it. What do you mean he's there? I mean he's standing in front of us right now, and he wants you here. Another silence. Longer this time. Cody. Derek's voice had dropped into something that was trying to sound calm, but was running underneath with something else entirely. How did he? I don't know. He just appeared. Derek, you need to come. I'm not. Derek. And now Cody's voice broke through its own restraint into something raw and honest. Please come, right now. I'm serious. The line stayed open. Ethan could hear the ambient sound of a car interior, an engine, the faint sound of a radio being turned off. Then Derek said flatly, I'll be there in 5 minutes, and hung up. Ethan looked at the 3 men in front of him. Sit down, he said. On the ground, right there. They sat. Derek pulled up in his black SUV and got out slowly, the way people get out of vehicles when they are trying to decide what posture to adopt before they fully commit to being somewhere. He saw the 3 of them on the ground, and he saw Ethan standing, and for a moment he just stood next to the open car door and looked at the geometry of the situation. Then he closed the door and walked over. This is not what I agreed to, Ethan said. Derek stopped about 10 feet away. My father made an agreement. I didn't sign anything. You're 29 years old. You came to a man's house in the middle of the night where his 9-year-old daughter was sleeping alone. Ethan let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. Say that back to me and tell me what you think you are. Derek's jaw tightened. I came to have a conversation. You sent 3 men to the sides of a house while you waited in a car down the street. That's not a conversation. That's a coward's version of violence. The word landed. Derek's face changed. Not into anger immediately, but into something that was working its way there, the specific process of a man who has been called something true that he has never been willing to hear. You need to watch what you say to me, Derek said. I've been watching what I say to you since the first night, Ethan said. I gave you every opportunity. At the warehouse I was clear. In your father's office I was fair. Tonight you came to my house. He paused. We're past watching what I say. Derek took 2 steps forward. The instinct of a man who uses physical proximity as a tool, who has learned that most people back up when he advances. Ethan didn't move. Derek stopped. He was close enough now that the space between them was the space of a confrontation, not a conversation, and something in his body understood before his mind fully processed it that this was different from every other time he had done this with someone. You want to fight me, Derek said. It was half statement, half question, half something that wanted to be a dare. No, Ethan said. I want you to understand something, and I want you to understand it completely so that we never have to be in the same place again. What? What you did in that warehouse, what you did when you held up that photograph, and what you did tonight by coming here. You did those things because you've never met anyone who could make you stop. Your father's money made you stop sometimes. Fear of consequences made you stop sometimes. But nobody ever made you understand what the actual cost of not stopping was. Ethan looked at him with the steadiness of anything. I can show you that. I'm giving you one more chance to choose not to need the lesson. Derek stared at him. The calculation on his face was visible. He was reading Ethan the way he had read every other man. He had stood in front of like this, searching for the thing that would tell him whether the words were real or theater. He found nothing that reassured him. But he had never walked away from something like this before. His entire identity was built on not walking away. You think you scare me, Derek said. I think you're smart enough to be scared, Ethan said. And I think you're too proud to act on it. That combination has gotten you this far, and it's going to get you hurt tonight if you don't make a different decision right now. Trent got up from the ground. He had been sitting there for 15 minutes, listening to this exchange, and something in him had decided that the dynamic had run its course, that his employer was being backed into a corner, and that the job he had been brought here to do had not changed just because the situation had. He picked up the pipe on the way up. Ethan heard the sound of him standing before he saw it, the shift of weight on gravel, and he was already turning when Trent committed to the swing. What happened in the next 4 seconds would be described differently by everyone who saw it. Cody would say later that it looked choreographed, like something from a movie, except it was faster than movies. The younger man, whose name was Josh, and who had never been in a situation where things moved this fast, would say he didn't fully see it, that he registered the swing, and then registered Trent on the ground, and did not have a clear memory of the sequence between them. What actually happened was this. Ethan stepped inside the arc of the swing, inside it, and forward, so the pipe went past him rather than into him. And in the same movement, he controlled the arm that held it, redirecting the momentum that Trent had put into the swing, and Trent's own force and mass did the rest. The large man went down hard, and he didn't get up, not because he was unconscious, but because the shoulder he had landed on was sending him signals that made standing seem inadvisable. The pipe was in Ethan's hand. He set it on the ground behind him, carefully out of reach of everyone. The whole thing had taken less time than it takes to say it. Derek had not moved. He was standing exactly where he had been standing when Trent went down, and his face had gone through several things in rapid succession, and had landed on something that was trying to hold itself together, but was showing cracks. Cody and Josh were both on their feet now, but neither of them was moving toward anything. They were standing the way people stand when they have just seen something that has reclassified the situation they are in. "Trent," Derek said. His voice was different. The performance was gone. It was just a voice now, a young man's voice with something in it that sounded close to fear. "Trent, get up." "His shoulders dislocated," Ethan said. "He needs to stay still." Derek stopped, started again. "You can't just—" "He swung a steel pipe at my head," Ethan said. "In front of my daughter's house, at 11 o'clock at night." He looked at Derek steadily. "I stopped it. That's all I did." Derek looked at Trent on the ground, then back at Ethan, and something in the architecture of his self-understanding was doing something it had probably never done before. It was revising, in real time, visibly against his will. "Who are you?" Derek said. It came out quieter than anything else he had said all night. Not aggressive, not tactical, genuinely asking. "I told you who I was," Ethan said. "In the warehouse parking lot, the night you came back the second time. You said you trained SEALs." "I did." "I thought you were—" Derek stopped. "Bluffing," Ethan said. "I know." Derek was quiet for a moment. The night was very still around them. Down the street a dog barked twice and stopped. The harbor was somewhere in the distance doing what it always did. "My father is going to be furious," Derek said. It came out almost involuntarily, like something that had been sitting at the front of his mind and escaped before he could manage it. "Yes," Ethan said. "He is. The agreement. He's going to say I—" Derek stopped again. He ran one hand through his hair, a gesture that was purely human, purely young, purely the motion of a man who has made a very bad decision and is beginning to fully understand the dimensions of it. Ethan looked at him, and for the first time since any of this had started, what he felt toward Derek Vaughn was not wariness and not anger. It was something closer to a tiredness that had pity somewhere underneath it. Derek was 29, and he had been given money instead of limits, and power instead of consequences, and the result was standing in front of him in the dark, undone by one man who hadn't done anything except refuse to be afraid. "Call an ambulance for Trent," Ethan said. "Then call the police and tell them what happened here tonight. Tell them the truth." Derek looked at him. "Why would I do that?" "Because the camera on the side of my house has been recording since you arrived," Ethan said. "And because you have a choice between telling the truth yourself or having the truth told for you. One of those gives you something, the other gives you nothing." Derek called the ambulance. He stood 10 feet away, with his back half turned, talking in a low voice, and while he was on the phone, Cody walked up to Ethan. Cody was the one Ethan had liked least at the warehouse, the one whose recording had been the pivot point of everything that followed. And now he was standing in front of Ethan, looking like someone who wanted to say something that required honesty. "How did you know we were here?" Cody asked. "You drove from the warehouse. How did you know before you left?" "Cameras," Ethan said. "We didn't see any cameras." "That's the point of them," Ethan said. Cody nodded slowly. He looked at Trent on the ground. Trent was sitting up now, holding his arm against his body, pale but conscious. Then Cody looked back at Ethan with the particular expression of someone who has just spent an extended period on the wrong side of a situation and is beginning to understand how he got there. "This was stupid," Cody said. "Tonight, all of it, from the beginning." "Yes," Ethan said. "Derek told me—" He stopped. "It doesn't matter what Derek told me. I drove here. That was my choice." Ethan looked at him. "That's more self-awareness than most people in your situation show. Doesn't help much right now." "It will," Ethan said. "When you talk to the police, be the one who gets there first with the honest version." Cody was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. A small nod, but a real one. The police arrived 11 minutes after the ambulance. Officer Reyes was in the second car, which told Ethan that his name had been flagged on the dispatch, that someone at the department had made sure he was notified when a call came in from this address. Reyes walked up to Ethan while his partner was talking to Derek's group and looked at the scene with the measured assessment of a man who had responded to enough of these situations to read them quickly. "You okay?" Reyes said. "Fine. Trent Hollis. He's got priors." Reyes glanced at the ambulance where the paramedics were working on Trent's shoulder. "What happened to him?" "He swung a pipe at me," Ethan said. "I redirected the swing. He fell." Reyes looked at him for a moment. "You redirected a pipe swing?" "Yes." "And he fell?" "Yes." Reyes made a note. "The camera footage. You have it. Backed up to 2 locations. I can give you access tonight. I'm going to need that." Reyes looked over at Derek, who was standing with his arms crossed, talking to the other officer in the terse, clipped manner of someone who has decided on a version of events and is committing to it. "He's going to say you were the aggressor." "He's going to say a lot of things," Ethan said. "The footage will say what happened." Reyes nodded slowly. He looked at Ethan with the expression he had been wearing since the first night at the warehouse. The expression of a cop who has encountered something he does not fully have a category for and is filing it carefully. "Mr. Walker," he said, "I've been doing this job for 14 years. I've responded to a lot of situations that escalated. Usually what happens is more people get hurt, more charges, bigger mess." He paused. "You've been involved in 2 incidents with the same group now. 2 incidents. And both times the only person who needed medical attention was someone who swung something at you first." Ethan said nothing. "I'm not criticizing you," Reyes said. "I'm just noting it." "I appreciate that," Ethan said. He went inside and knocked 3 times on the bathroom door. He heard the count in Mia's voice, almost inaudible through the wood. 1, 2, 3. Then the lock turned and the door opened, and she was standing there in her pajamas, with her arms crossed over her chest, in the posture she had when she was holding herself together through something difficult. And he crouched down to her level and looked at her face. Her eyes were dry. Her jaw was set. She looked like someone who had been frightened and had decided that the fear was not going to be the thing that defined what she did with it. "Everyone okay?" she said. "Everyone okay?" he said. "I heard the ambulance. One of them got hurt. Not badly. Paramedics are handling it." She looked at him, scanning his face, his hands, his posture with the systematic thoroughness she brought to everything, looking for the thing he might not be telling her. "You're not hurt," she said. It came out half statement, half relief. "I'm not hurt," he said. "I'm right here." She unfolded her arms and leaned into him, and he held her there in the bathroom doorway, while outside on his street, the lights from 2 police cars moved across the walls of his house in slow red and blue rotations. She was shaking slightly. She had held it together until this moment, and now that the door was open and he was real and present, she was letting herself feel it, which was the right thing, the healthy thing, the thing he had always tried to show her by example, that strength was not the absence of feeling. It was what you did while you felt it. I did exactly what you said, she told him, her voice muffled against his shoulder. I know you did. I'm so proud of you. 3 knocks, she said. 3 knocks, he agreed. Gerald Vaughn called at 7 the next morning. Ethan was in the kitchen making breakfast. Mia still asleep upstairs, the normalcy of eggs in a pan and coffee on the counter existing in strange parallel with the events of 8 hours ago. He saw Gerald's number and answered it. Gerald did not say good morning. He did not ask how Ethan was. He said, I need you to understand that what Derek did last night was without my knowledge and contrary to the agreement I made in good faith. I know, Ethan said. A pause. Gerald had expected more resistance. You know, you're a businessman, Mr. Vaughn. Violating a written agreement inside 2 weeks would be bad business. Derek didn't violate it on your behalf. He violated it because he couldn't accept the situation and didn't have the discipline to manage himself. Ethan flipped the eggs. That's a different problem. And it's yours, not mine. Another pause longer. What do you want from this? I want what I said in your office. Complete cessation of any harassment directed at me, my daughter, my workplace, or anyone associated with me. I want it to actually happen this time. And what Derek did last night is between Derek and the district attorney's office, Ethan said. I'm not going to interfere with that process in either direction. I'm also not going to amplify it beyond what it is. What I am going to do is make sure it's completely documented, and make sure that documentation includes the fact that your son violated a legal agreement in the presence of multiple witnesses and a camera. Gerald was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, something had shifted in his voice. The practiced control was still there, but underneath it was something that sounded for the first time genuinely tired. My son has a problem, Gerald said. He's always had a problem. I've managed it for 29 years, and sometimes I wonder if managing it was the right approach. Ethan said nothing. He was not going to give Gerald Vaughn absolution. But he recognized in what the man had just said something true. The particular exhaustion of a parent who has spent decades protecting someone from the consequences of who they are, and is beginning to understand what that protection has cost. Get him help, Ethan said. Real help, not management. Gerald was silent. And honor the agreement, Ethan said. Completely. He ended the call. What nobody had anticipated was Cody. Cody Marsh, 24 years old, who had been recording on his phone the night of the warehouse incident, who had been sitting on the ground in front of Ethan's house when the police arrived, who had told Ethan he wanted to be the one who got to the honest version first. Cody had done exactly that. He had given a statement to Reyes at the scene that was, by the officer's account, the most straightforward and complete account of the situation from anyone involved. He had named Derek as the instigator of all 3 incidents, including specifics about the planning of the second warehouse visit and the decision to go to Ethan's house. He had confirmed that the first night's recording existed, confirmed that he had been the one to make it, and confirmed that it captured everything Ethan had said it captured. He had also, in a moment that surprised even Reyes, said something that he had apparently been carrying for a while. He said, I knew it was wrong from the beginning. I knew it when he held up the picture of the little girl. I don't want to be that guy. I don't know how I ended up being that guy. Reyes had relayed this to Ethan the next day, not as information relevant to the case, but as something he thought Ethan should know. He's going to cooperate fully, Reyes said. His lawyer is recommending it, and he says he doesn't need a lawyer to tell him to do the right thing. Ethan sat with that for a moment. He thought about Cody in the warehouse laughing at Derek's jokes, playing the role of a man who didn't think too hard about the things he participated in. He thought about Cody on the ground in front of his house saying, I don't know how I ended up being that guy. That was the question, wasn't it? Not how do you stop being the guy, but how did you become him, and when did you stop noticing it happening? What's going to happen to him? Ethan asked. Cooperating witness. Probably community service fines, probation, depending on the DA. Reyes paused. Why do you ask? Because he's 24, and he made a decision to be honest when it cost him something, Ethan said. That matters. Derek was charged with criminal threatening, trespassing, violation of a civil agreement, and conspiracy to intimidate. The charges were serious enough that Gerald Vaughn's network of relationships and contributions and informal leverage, the architecture that had made Derek untouchable for most of his adult life, was not going to be sufficient to make them disappear. Reyes called Ethan to tell him. "It's real this time," Reyes said. "The DA wants to make an example, partly because of the pattern, partly because of the written agreement violation, partly because—" He paused. "Partly because of who you are. Or who you were." It came out. Ethan was quiet for a moment. "What came out?" "Your service record, your training background. When we were building the incident reports, we needed to document your assessment of the threat level and why your response was proportional. Your background came up." Another pause. "A lot of people in the department have a different kind of respect for what you do." "What I did," Ethan said. "I don't do it anymore." "Fair enough. But the DA's office looked at a decorated SEAL trainer who called the police before he did anything, who warned the defendants multiple times, who used minimum necessary force when attacked, who secured his daughter before engaging, and who documented everything from the beginning." Reyes let that sit for a second. "They're not looking to make your life complicated." "I know," Ethan said. "Thank you, Reyes." "Thank you," Reyes said. "Honestly, for not making this worse than it needed to be." Mia found out the next day. Not from Ethan. From two kids at school who had parents who talked, which was how most things in Crestwood eventually circulated. She came home that afternoon quieter than usual and sat at the kitchen table and waited until Ethan set a bowl of soup in front of her before she said anything. "Tyler Marsh told everyone that you're a Navy SEAL," she said. Ethan sat down across from her. "Former. And technically I was a trainer, not an operator for most of my career." She processed that. "So the things you did, to those men, at the warehouse, at our house." "Yes. You knew how to do all of that." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment, turning her spoon in the soup. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want that to be the thing you knew me as," he said. "I wanted you to know me as your father." "I do know you as my father," she said with a certainty that was almost impatient, as if this were obvious. "But you're also other things, and I think I'm old enough to know what those things are." He looked at her across the table. She was 9 years old. She had locked herself in a bathroom and counted to 3 in a whisper, while men were outside her house in the dark. She had come out of that bathroom dry-eyed and asked him if everyone was okay before she asked about herself. "You're right," he said. "I'm sorry." She looked at him for a long moment. "Were you good at it, the training?" "Yes," he said. "I was good at it." "Is that why you stopped? Because you were too good at it, and you didn't want to be?" The question hit him in a way he hadn't expected. Not because it was wrong, but because it was in the way that Mia's questions often were more precise than he had thought anyone would manage. "Something like that," he said. She nodded. She picked up her spoon. "I'm not afraid of knowing things," she said. "I'd rather know." "I know," he said. "That's one of the things about you that I—" He stopped. Started again. "You're the most honest person I know, Mia. You have been since you were about 4. She considered this. 4 seems young to be honest. "You were an early starter," he said. She almost smiled. Then she did smile. Then she ate her soup. And Ethan sat across from her in the kitchen of the house where 3 men had come in the dark and been turned away in the town he had chosen for its quietness, in the ordinary life he had built around one extraordinary person, and he understood with the particular clarity that only comes after something difficult has passed, that he had not failed her by doing what he had done. He had kept the promise. Not the easy promise. Not the comfortable one. The real one. The one a father makes not with words, but with everything else he has. The one that says, "I will be here. Whatever here requires." The video went online on a Thursday. Ethan didn't post it. He hadn't given it to anyone. He had uploaded the camera footage to 2 secure locations as evidence for the police and his attorney, and that was the extent of what he had done with it. But Cody Marsh, in the process of cooperating with the district attorney's office, had provided his own phone footage from the first warehouse night, and somewhere in the chain of legal documents sharing a copy had found its way to someone who understood what it was worth. By Thursday afternoon, it had 40,000 views. By Thursday evening, it had 400,000. Ethan found out because Raymond called him at the warehouse at 9 o'clock that night mid-shift with a tone in his voice that Ethan had never heard from Raymond before, which was a kind of stunned bewilderment. "There's a video," Raymond said, "of the warehouse, that first night. It's everywhere." "I know about the video," Ethan said. "Ethan, there are news outlets calling the warehouse number. 3 of them. I've gotten 6 calls in the last hour." "Don't talk to them," Ethan said. "Don't confirm anything, don't deny anything. Give them nothing. They already know your name." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "How?" "The police report is public record. Someone pulled it." Raymond paused. "Ethan, they're saying you're a Navy SEAL trainer." "Former," Ethan said. "I was a trainer." Another pause. Longer. "Is that true?" "Yes." Raymond was silent for a full 5 seconds. Then he said quietly, 22 years I've managed this warehouse, and I have never had an employee who—" He stopped. Started again. "You came in here and you managed inventory, and you filed incident reports, and you installed a backup camera system that I didn't even know about, and you—" He stopped again. "Who are you?" "I'm your night shift manager," Ethan said. "Nothing has changed." Everything changed. By Friday morning, the video had passed 1 million views. By Friday afternoon, a national news aggregator had picked it up with a headline that read, "Quiet Oregon. Dad turns out to be elite military trainer, and the 6 men who threatened his daughter found out the hard way." The headline was inaccurate in several details, which is how these things always went, but the core of it was visible in the footage, and the footage was undeniable. Ethan did not watch the video. He had no need to watch it. He had been there. What he did was take Mia to school at the regular time, come home, sit at the kitchen table with his coffee, and look at his phone for a long time without picking it up. There were 14 missed calls. 3 from numbers he didn't recognize, which were almost certainly journalists. 2 from people in Crestwood whose names he knew but hadn't spoken to in months. 1 from Garrett in Portland. 1 from Hayes. He called Hayes first. She answered before the first ring finished, which meant she had been waiting for it. "How bad?" he said. "Depends on what you mean by bad," she said. "From a professional standpoint, nothing negative. The footage shows a textbook proportional response. Anyone with relevant training is going to watch that and see someone who did everything correctly." She paused. "From a personal standpoint, I imagine it's exactly what you didn't want." "It's exactly what I didn't want," he confirmed. "How's Mia?" "She went to school. She knows about the video. She asked me last night if I was upset that people knew." "What did you tell her?" "I told her it was complicated." He paused. "She said most things worth understanding are complicated." Hayes was quiet for a moment. "She sounds like someone I'd like to meet." "She'd like you," Ethan said. "She'd interrogate you for 2 hours about what it's like to run a training program, and then she'd write a report about it for her own personal records." "She sounds like you," Hayes said. "The version of you that talks more." The neighbor who came to the door first was a woman named Patrice, who lived 3 houses down and had 2 teenage sons and a husband who worked on the fishing boats and who had always been friendly in the way of people who are naturally warm without being intrusive. She knocked at 9:30 on Friday morning, holding a casserole dish with both hands. Ethan opened the door. "I made this," Patrice said, lifting the dish slightly as evidence. "I didn't know what else to do. I saw the video. I saw what those men did. I wanted to—" She stopped. Her eyes were doing something complicated. "I've lived 3 houses from you for 3 years, and I didn't know. And I kept thinking, what if something had happened? What if you hadn't been able to—" She stopped again. "I'm sorry. I don't know what I'm trying to say." "You don't have to say anything," Ethan said. He took the casserole. "Is Mia okay?" "She's at school. She's fine." Patrice nodded. She looked at him for a moment, with the expression of someone who is reassessing a person they thought they knew, and finding the new version both more and less surprising than expected. "You know my oldest Marcus, he's 17. He wants to go into the military. He's been talking about it for 2 years." That's a serious decision, Ethan said. He'd probably want to talk to you, Patrice said, if you were ever willing. Ethan looked at Then he looked at the casserole dish in his hands, which was still warm. Tell him to come by sometime. Patrice smiled. It was a genuine smile, a relieved one. The smile of a woman who had been carrying worry about a neighbor she thought was alone in something, and had just found out he was less alone than she knew. Thank you, she said, for what you did, for all of it. Ethan nodded. He did not say it was nothing because it wasn't nothing. He did not say it was his duty because that framing had always felt dishonest to him, a way of making something personal sound institutional. He said, "She's my daughter." And Patrice seemed to understand that this was the complete answer, the only answer, and she went back down the porch steps and he closed the door. The journalist found him on Saturday. Her name was Sandra Okafor, and she worked for a regional news outlet based in Portland, and she was good at her job in the particular way of journalists who do not rely on ambush, but on patience. She had gotten his address from the public record, and she had driven to Crestwood, and she knocked on his door at 10 in the morning, with a press credential visible around her neck, and the expression of someone who has thought carefully about how to have this conversation. Ethan opened the door and looked at the credential and then at her face. "I'm not going to talk to you," he said. Not unkindly. "I understand," she said. "I'd like to leave you my card anyway, in case that changes." He took the card. "Mr. Walker," she said, "I've watched the video 40 times. I've read the police reports. I've talked to Officer Reyes, who is very careful about what he says, but said enough. I've talked to 2 of your neighbors. I've talked to Raymond Chu." She paused. "I'm going to write this story. I want to write it accurately. The most accurate version requires you." "Write it without me," he said. "You'll be fine." "I probably will," she agreed. "But there's a part of this story that nobody else can tell me. Not Reyes, not Raymond, not your neighbors. They can tell me what you did. Nobody can tell me why except you." Ethan looked at her for a moment. She had the specific quality of someone who meant what she said, not as a journalistic strategy, but as a genuine statement of what mattered to her about the work. "I did it because she's my daughter," he said. "That's the why. Write it however you want around that, but that's the center of it." Sandra Okafor looked at him. She wrote something in her notebook. Then she said, "Thank you." And she meant it, and she walked back to her car. Derek Vaughn's arraignment was on a Monday. Ethan did not attend. He had no legal obligation to be there, and no desire to be in the same room with Derek before he had to be. Reyes called him afterward with a summary. "He pulled not guilty," Reyes said, which everyone expected. His lawyer is going to argue that the agreement his father signed wasn't binding on Derek personally, which is a stretch, but not impossible. He's also going to try to characterize the warehouse incident as a legitimate business negotiation that escalated. What does the DA think? The DA thinks the video makes the characterization difficult. Reyes paused. "Ethan, I want to give you a heads up on something. Derek's lawyer is going to request your service record as part of the defense. They're going to try to argue that your training made you a disproportionate response to whatever threat they can claim Derek represented, that you were over-equipped for the situation." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "They're going to say I'm too dangerous to be a victim." "Essentially, yes." "What does the DA say about that?" "She says the law doesn't distinguish between trained and untrained self-defense. A proportional response is proportional regardless of the respondent's background. But she wants you to be prepared for the argument, because it's going to be made in court, and probably in public." Ethan thought about that. He thought about the years he had spent making himself capable of exactly what he had done, and he thought about the choice to use that capability, and the choice not to use more of it than was needed. And he thought about Derek's lawyer standing in a courtroom, and arguing that the problem was the man who had been threatened, not the men who had done the threatening. "Tell the DA I'll cooperate fully," he said, "whatever she needs." The story Sandra Okafor wrote was published on Wednesday. It ran long 3,000 words, the kind of piece that doesn't exist much anymore, outside of specific publications that still believe in it. She had done what she said she would do. She had written it accurately. She had used the line he gave her. "I did it because she's my daughter," as the last line of the piece, which was where last lines go when they are the truest thing in the story. Ethan read it at the kitchen table before Mia woke up. It was strange reading a version of yourself that someone else had assembled. She had the facts right. She had the sequence right. She had gotten something about his character right in a way that unsettled him slightly. The observation that's the most striking thing about the incident footage was not what Ethan had done, but when he had stopped the precision of it, the way he had not continued past the point of necessity in any single instance. She had written, "This is not what rage looks like. This is what training looks like." And the difference matters because one of them is about the man doing it, and the other is entirely about the person he's protecting. Mia came downstairs at 7:15 and poured herself a glass of orange juice and sat across from him and looked at his face. "You're reading it," she said. "Yes." "Is it good?" "It's accurate," he said. "Which is better than good." She reached across the table and took the phone from him and read it herself, which she did quickly, moving through it with the focused efficiency she brought to everything she read. He watched her face while she read. She gave nothing away, which was a thing she had always done, held her reactions internal until she had finished processing. She set the phone down. "She got you right," Mia said. "You think, the part about stopping, that's the most important part," and she understood it. Mia picked up her juice. "Most people wouldn't have stopped." "Most people with my training would have," Ethan said. "Maybe," Mia said. "But you weren't thinking about your training when you stopped. You were thinking about me." Ethan looked at her across the table. "I was upstairs," she said simply. "You stopped every time because you wanted to be able to come back upstairs. If you'd lost control even a little, it would have taken longer, been messier, and you needed it to be over." She paused. "I know you, Dad. I know how you think." He sat with that for a moment. He had spent 11 years teaching people that clarity of purpose was the thing that made the difference in a dangerous situation. Not strength, not skill, purpose. Know what you're doing and why you're doing it, and you will stop at exactly the right moment because the purpose defines the boundary. He had taught that as a professional principle. He had lived it as something else entirely. The story spread. The way. Things spread now, not in one direction, but in all directions simultaneously, amplified and commented on and argued about and clipped into 30-second pieces that missed the point and 5-minute discussions that almost got it. Ethan's name was in more conversations that week than it had been in the entire 4 years he had lived in Crestwood. He did not enjoy this, but he handled it in the same way he had handled the situation that created it. He stayed in his lane. He did his job. He took Mia to school and picked her up and cooked dinner and helped with homework. He showed up at the warehouse every night. He answered the questions he was required to answer and left the rest alone. What surprised him was the letters. They started arriving at the warehouse because the warehouse address was the one that appeared on the public police report, and Raymond brought them to him on Friday of that week in a stack that was larger than Ethan had expected. Some were from people in Crestwood. Some were from people in Oregon. Some were from people in states he had never visited. Some were from veterans. Some were from single parents. Some were from people who had been in situations that rhymed with his and had not had the same outcome. One was from a man in Ohio who wrote 3 paragraphs about his daughter and then a single sentence at the end that said, "Thank you for showing us what it looks like to choose her over everything else." Ethan read that one twice. Then he folded it and put it in his jacket pocket and kept it there for a week before he could explain to himself why. Gerald Vaughn called again on Friday afternoon. Ethan almost didn't answer. He had no legal obligation to speak to Gerald and no personal desire to. But something in him understood that this call was different from the others. The tone of the previous calls had been a businessman managing a liability. This tone, the way the phone rang, the timing of it midday on a Friday, felt like something else. He answered. "I've been trying to find the right words for 3 days, Gerald said. "Not good afternoon, not Mr. Walker, just that directly. I've been sitting in my office reading things about my son, and reading things about what my son has done, and trying to find a version of this where I'm not responsible." Ethan said nothing. "I can't find it," Gerald said. The admission sat between them on the line. Ethan let it sit. He did not rush to fill it. "He's 29 years old," Gerald continued. "He is the way he is because of how I raised him. I gave him everything, and I taught him that having everything meant he was owed everything. That was a mistake. That was my mistake." A pause. "I'm not calling to ask you to do anything. Drop charges, say something publicly, nothing like that. I'm calling because I owe you the honesty of that acknowledgement." "I hear you," Ethan said. "Is that enough?" Gerald asked. "An acknowledgement." "No," Ethan said. "But it's a start. The rest of it is between Derek and the court, and what you do with what you just said." He paused. "Get him help, Mr. Vaughn. Real help, not management. I told you that before." "I've already made this call," Gerald said quietly. "His lawyer is recommending a treatment program as part of the sentencing negotiation. I've agreed to fund it and to make it a condition of any support I continue to provide." "That's a significant change," Ethan said. "It's 30 years overdue," Gerald said. "I know that." Ethan thought about what Hayes had said to him once early in his training years, when he'd asked her how you evaluated whether a candidate who had failed was capable of growth. She had said, "Watch what they do with the truth when they finally stop running from it. Some people use it to rebuild. Some people use it to justify themselves. The ones who use it to rebuild are the ones worth the investment." "Good luck," Ethan said, and he meant it. The trial when it came was 3 months later. Ethan testified on a Thursday, which turned out to be the same Thursday that Mia had a math test and a soccer scrimmage, both of which she handled without him there, because she had grown up understanding that her father was a person who had obligations to the world beyond their kitchen table, and that this was not a subtraction from what he gave her, but simply the shape of who he was. He wore a plain gray suit that he had bought 4 years ago for a situation he no longer remembered. He sat in the witness box and answered questions from the DA and then from Derek's defense attorney, and the defense attorney did exactly what Reyes had warned him would happen. "Mr. Walker," the attorney said, "isn't it true that your military training makes you significantly more capable of violence than an ordinary civilian?" "My training makes me more capable of controlling a situation than an ordinary civilian," Ethan said, "which is why I was able to use minimum necessary force rather than more. But your capacity for violence is significantly elevated." "My capacity for restraint is significantly elevated," Ethan said. "That's what the training is actually for." The attorney paused. It was a brief pause, the pause of someone who had prepared for several answers, and not specifically this one. "You're saying your training is why you didn't do more. I'm saying my training is why I did exactly what was needed and stopped. An untrained person in my situation might have lost control. I didn't. The training is why." The attorney moved on, but Ethan caught the jury looking at him in a way that suggested the answer had landed somewhere useful. Derek sat at the defense table for the duration of Ethan's testimony and looked at him with the expression of someone who was being forced by the structure of a legal proceeding to remain in the same room with a version of events he found unbearable. Ethan looked at him once, directly, not confrontationally, not with triumph, just a look the kind that asks a question without words, the kind that says, "Do you understand now?" Derek looked away, but before he did, in the half-second, before his eyes moved, Ethan saw something in Derek's face that he had not seen there before. In all of it, in the warehouse and the parking lot and the front of his house and Gerald's office and the arraignment, he had never seen this particular thing. Shame. Real shame, not the anger that wears shame's clothes, not the embarrassment of being caught, but the deeper thing. The recognition that cuts below pride and calculation and self-justification down to the raw fact of what you have been. Ethan did not feel satisfaction at seeing it. He felt something more complicated and less comfortable, the particular weight of a man who has been trained to read people accurately, and who can see clearly that the young man who threatened his daughter and came to his house in the dark is also underneath all of it. A person who has failed long before he started failing others. He didn't forgive Derek. That would come later, slowly, in pieces over time, in the specific way that forgiveness actually moves, rather than the clean, dramatic way it happens in stories. But he did not hate him either. He stepped down from the witness box and walked out of the courtroom into the ordinary light of a Thursday afternoon, and he called Mia between her math test and her soccer scrimmage to tell her he was done, and she said good and asked if he was okay, and he said he was, and she said the math test had been fine, but she was nervous about the scrimmage, and he said she was going to be great, and she said, "You always say that," and he said, "I always mean it," and she laughed, and he stood on the courthouse steps holding his phone and listening to his daughter laugh and thought, "This is it. This is the thing. This is what all of it was for." Derek was convicted on 3 of 4 counts: criminal threatening, trespassing, violation of a civil legal agreement. The conspiracy charge was reduced. He was sentenced to 18 months of supervised probation, mandatory enrollment in a residential treatment program that Gerald had arranged, 200 hours of community service, and a restraining order that covered Ethan Mia Portside Logistics and their home address. Cody Marsh received a fine and community service and probation. His cooperation and his candor had been noted in the DA's recommendation. He did not attend any of the proceedings after his initial statement. Reyes told Ethan that Cody had moved to a different part of Oregon and was working in construction and had not had any further contact with Derek or any of the group. Ethan thought about the man who had said, "I don't know how I ended up being that guy." He hoped construction was going well. He hoped the honest version had led somewhere useful. Trent Hollis was charged separately for the pipe assault at Ethan's house. He pled guilty to avoid trial and received a suspended sentence. His shoulder healed in about 8 weeks, which Ethan knew because Reyes mentioned it, and which Ethan noted without comment. Josh, the youngest, the one who had barely participated in anything and had spent most of his time on the ground, looking like someone who deeply regretted being there, was charged only with trespassing. He was 22. Ethan hoped he took the experience as an education rather than a grievance. The morning after the verdict, Ethan woke up before Mia and made breakfast and sat at the kitchen table in the early quiet and tried to take stock of the thing that had happened. 3 months ago, he had been invisible on purpose. He had built that invisibility carefully, deliberately, as the structure inside which an ordinary life could happen. The routine of it, the school and the dinner and the homework and the warehouse shifts. Those things were not a cover for something else. They were the point. They were what he had chosen. Now his name was in a news story that had been read by 2 million people. His service record was in a public court document. The people of Crestwood knew things about him that he had not told them. The comfortable wall of ordinary that he had spent 4 years building had been dismantled in the space of 3 weeks by 6 men who had chosen him as a target for the specific reason that he looked like no one. He should have felt the loss of it. He had expected to feel the loss of it. What he felt instead was harder to name. He thought about what Mia had said at the kitchen table reading the story. "She got you right. The part about stopping. That's the most important part." He thought about the letter from the man in Ohio. "Thank you for showing us what it looks like to choose her over everything else." He thought about Cody saying, "I don't know how I ended up being that guy." I thought about Hayes, who had asked him, "Are you ready?" And his answer, "I've been ready for 4 years. I just hoped I wouldn't have to be." The hoping had been real. The readiness had also been real. And in the end, the readiness had served the hope because the thing he had been ready for was not violence. It had never been violence. It had been this. The moment when the life you built is tested by something that has no patience for what you prefer. And the only question that matters is whether what you are is enough for what's required. It was enough. He hadn't failed her. Mia came downstairs at 7:15 with her backpack already on, which meant she had a quiz or a presentation and had been up earlier than she let on to prepare for it. She saw the breakfast on the table and sat down and ate with the practical efficiency of a person with a schedule. "The verdict," she said between bites. "Reyes texted me last night." Ethan looked at her. "He texted you. He asked me if it was okay to send me the outcome directly instead of through you. I said yes." She ate another bite. "He's a good person." "He is," Ethan agreed. 3 out of 4 counts, she said. "That's good." "Yes." She finished eating and picked up her backpack and stood, then paused the way she did when there was something she had been thinking about and had decided to say. "Dad." "Yeah. I know you wanted things to stay the way they were, the quiet, nobody knowing about you." She looked at him with the directness that had always been her most striking characteristic, the willingness to look at a thing straight and say what she saw. "I think things are going to be different now, in the town, with people. I think more people are going to want to know you." "I know," he said. "Is that okay?" I thought about it honestly, the way she had taught him by example, to think about things without the comfortable shortcuts of easy answers. "It's going to take some getting used to," he said. "But yes, I think it's okay." She nodded. "Good." She adjusted the strap of her backpack. "Because I think you were a little too invisible anyway. You're a good person. People should know that." Then she went to school the same way she had gone every morning. The same routine, the same town, the same ordinary world that had been there before. All of this started and was still there. Now unchanged in the ways that mattered and changed in the ways that needed to be. Ethan sat at the table for a while after she left. He thought a little too invisible. I thought about the man he had been before Mia. The man defined entirely by capability and mission, and the clean satisfaction of doing difficult things with precision. He thought about the choice to step away from that man, to put him down deliberately, like setting something heavy on a shelf, and to pick up this quieter and more complicated life instead. He had not lost the first man. He had learned in the last 3 months that you did not lose what you had spent years becoming. It was there when you needed it. It was there when she needed it. But it did not have to be the whole of you. He could be the father who cooked dinner and sat in the bleachers and listened to his daughter explain bioluminescence with passionate authority. He could also be the man who walked out into a parking lot in the dark and said without drama, without performance, with complete and absolute certainty, "You picked the wrong man." Both of those things were true. Both of them were him. And Mia, who had always been the most honest person in any room she occupied, had seen both of them clearly from the beginning and had never once asked him to be only one. 6 weeks after the verdict, Ethan got a call from a man named David Kowalski. Kowalski was 53 years old, a former pipe fitter who had been laid off 14 months ago and had been doing odd jobs since, and he lived 4 blocks from Portside Logistics in a house he was behind on the mortgage for. He had gotten Ethan's number from Patrice, who had gotten it from Raymond, and he called on a Sunday morning and opened with, "I don't know if you remember me. I was at the school board meeting in March. You were there for Mia's science presentation night." Ethan remembered the meeting. He did not remember Kowalski specifically. "I remember the night," Ethan said. "Right." Kowalski cleared his throat. "I'm calling because something happened last week, and I didn't know who else to call. My son is 19. He works at a gas station on Route 7. 3 men came in Thursday night and robbed the place. They didn't hurt him, thank God, but they put a gun in his face and he's not doing well. He can't sleep. He doesn't want to go back to work. He keeps saying he froze and he's ashamed that he froze." Ethan was quiet for a moment. He froze because his body was doing what bodies do when a gun is pointed at them. That's not weakness. That's physiology. "That's what I told him," Kowalski said. "He doesn't believe me." "Would he believe it from someone else?" A pause. "That's why I called." He drove to the Kowalski house that afternoon. The son's name was Ryan, and he was sitting at the kitchen table when Ethan came in with the posture of someone who had been sitting in the same place, doing the same unhelpful internal conversation for days. He was a big kid, broad through the shoulders, the kind of physical build that makes the shame of freezing worse, because the body's failure to perform feels like a betrayal of what it looked like. Ethan sat across from him. "Tell me what happened," he said. Ryan looked at him. He had the expression of someone who has told the story several times and found it gets worse each time rather than better. 3 guys came in at 11. I was alone. One of them came around the counter and put a gun here. He touched the side of his own jaw. And I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I just stood there. "What were you thinking?" Ethan asked. Ryan blinked. Nobody had asked him that. They had all asked what happened, what he did, what he should have done. Nobody had asked what he was thinking. "I was thinking about my mom," Ryan said. It came out quiet and a little raw, like something he hadn't said yet. "I kept thinking she's going to find out I got shot. I kept thinking about her face when she found out." Ethan nodded. So your brain was working. It was working on the most important thing to you. I didn't do anything. You survived, Ethan said. That was the correct outcome. There was a gun at your jaw, and you are sitting in your kitchen right now. You did the right thing. Ryan stared at him. But the freezing kept you alive, Ethan said. 19-year-old kid, no training alone, outnumbered 3-to-1 firearm at contact distance. Any movement you made could have ended differently. Your body understood that before your conscious mind could. It held you still because stillness was survival. He paused. That's not weakness. That's the most sophisticated threat assessment system on Earth doing its job. Ryan was quiet for a long time. His jaw worked once. Nobody told me that, he finally said. I know, Ethan said. They should have. He stayed at the Kowalski house for 2 hours. He talked to Ryan about what the body does under threat, about why training exists, and what it actually accomplishes, about the difference between a prepared response and an untrained one, and why neither was a measure of character. He talked to Kowalski Sr. about what to watch for in the weeks ahead, the signs that what Ryan was carrying had become something that needed professional support. He drove home and made dinner and sat with Mia while she worked on a project about deep-sea pressure zones. And he thought about Ryan Kowalski, sitting at that kitchen table with his hand on his own jaw, showing him where the gun had been. And he thought about the letters still sitting in a stack on the kitchen counter, the ones from Ohio, and from veterans, and from single parents. And he thought about Patrice's son Marcus, 17 years old, wanting to talk about the military. He thought about Hayes, who had called him twice since the trial, and both times had said without pressure, simply as information. There's a version of what you did in the SEAL program that you could do for ordinary people. Not operators, not candidates, civilians. People who just want to understand how to be less afraid. He had said both times that he was thinking about it. He was still thinking about it. Mia put her pencil down and looked at him across the table. You've been quiet for an hour, she said. I've been thinking. About the Kowalski kid. He looked at her. How do you know about that? Patrice told Mrs. Patterson, who told half the school. Mia said with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who has long understood that small towns are information systems. You helped him. He's doing better. Everyone's talking about it. I talked to him for 2 hours, Ethan said. I didn't do anything. You told him the right thing, Mia said. That's not nothing. Sometimes the right thing said at the right moment is the most important thing there is. She looked at him with the directness that still after 9 years caught him slightly off guard with its precision. You should do more of it. More of what? Whatever you did today. For Ryan. That. She picked her pencil back up. You know things that other people don't know. Useful things. Things that would help people be less scared and less hurt. You've been keeping them to yourself because you didn't want people to know who you were. She paused. They know now. Ethan looked at his daughter. She looked back at him with the patience of someone who has said the true thing and is waiting for the other person to catch up to it. You think I should start a program, he said. I think you should stop pretending you don't already know that you should, she said, and went back to her pressure zones. He called Hayes that night. I want to talk about the program, he said. A beat of silence. Then Hayes said, I'll drive up this weekend. She arrived Saturday morning in a truck that had seen considerable use wearing civilian clothes that somehow still communicated military posture, and she sat at Ethan's kitchen table and met Mia, who did exactly what Ethan had predicted and interrogated her for 40 minutes about the structure of SEAL training before excusing herself to go work on her Pressure Zones project. Hayes watched her go and then looked at Ethan with an expression he hadn't seen on her face very often, which was something close to being genuinely moved. She's extraordinary, Hayes said. I know, Ethan said. She gets it from somewhere. Her mother was remarkable, Ethan said. It came out simply without the weight it used to carry, the clean truth of a fact that no longer needed protection. Mia got the best of both of us and then improved on it. Hayes smiled. Then she opened a folder she had brought and set it on the table between them. Okay, here's what I've been thinking. What Hayes had been thinking was more developed than Ethan had expected. She had spent the weeks since the trial sketching out the bones of a program that was not what Ethan had done professionally, and not what he had done in that parking lot, but something that lived between those two things and was built for a different population entirely. Not operators, not candidates, not people who wanted to fight, people who wanted to stop being afraid of a world that had given them reasons to be afraid. The curriculum she outlined was grounded in three things: awareness, which was the ability to read a situation before it became dangerous; decision, which was knowing in advance what your options were so that you were not making choices for the first time under pressure; and proportion, which was understanding that the goal of any dangerous situation was not to win, but to survive and protect. "This is not a self-defense class," Hayes said. "Those exist everywhere. This is something different. This is about the 2 minutes before the self-defense situation and how those 2 minutes determine everything." "Who's the audience?" Ethan said. "Start local. Crestwood. People in the Harbor District who watched what happened at Portside and at your house and who are thinking about their own vulnerabilities. Single parents. Small business owners. People who don't have training and who know they don't and who have been walking around with that awareness as a weight." She paused. "People like Ryan Kowalski." Ethan looked at the folder. Then he looked at Hayes. "Free," he said. "Free," she confirmed. "At least to start. At least for the community." She held his gaze. "You have enough money to do this without charging for it. I know what you saved over 11 years. I know you're not here because you have to be. I'm here because Mia needed—" "I know why you're here," Hayes said. "I'm saying you can afford to give this away, and I think giving it away is the right call. Because the moment you charge for it, it becomes a business. And what you're describing isn't a business." "What is it?" Ethan asked. Hayes was quiet for a moment. "It's what you've always done," she said. "Making people more capable of surviving the world they're actually in." The first session happened on a Thursday evening, 6 weeks later, in the community room of the Crestwood Library, which the librarian had offered, without hesitation, when Patrice had mentioned what it was for. Ethan had expected 12 people. 23 showed up. He stood at the front of the room and looked at them and felt for the first moment in longer than he could easily measure the specific feeling that had made him good at what he had spent 11 years doing. Not power, not authority. Something quieter. The feeling of being exactly in the right place for exactly the reason that made sense. He started talking. He talked for 2 hours. He did not use slides or handouts or any of the structured materials Hayes had helped him draft. He talked the way he had always talked when the talking was real, directly without ornamentation, in the language of people who needed the information and not the performance of it. He told them about awareness. About how most dangerous situations announce themselves before they become dangerous, and about how to read those announcements. He told them about decision loops, the mental preparation that means you have already thought through your options before the moment arrives. He told them about proportion, about knowing the difference between a threat that requires distance and a threat that requires engagement, and a threat that requires only presence and calm. He told them about Ryan Kowalski, without using Ryan's name, and about what the body does under extreme stress, and about why freezing is not failure. He saw several people in the room shift when he said it, the small involuntary movement of someone who has been carrying something and has just felt it lighten. After the session ended, a woman named Gloria stayed behind. She was in her mid-60s, with the bearing of someone who had spent a long time being the responsible one in every situation she was in. She waited until the room had cleared, and then walked up to Ethan with her coat over one arm and said, "My husband died 3 years ago. I live alone. I have been afraid to take the trash out after dark for 3 years." Ethan looked at her. "I'm not going to be afraid of my own trash anymore," she said. Not to him exactly, more to herself, using him as the witness. "I just needed someone to tell me what to do with it." "It's a process," Ethan said. "It takes practice." "I know," she said. "I'll be here next week." She put her coat on and walked out. Ethan stood in the empty community room for a moment. I thought about what Hayes had said. Making people more capable of surviving the world they're actually in. He thought about 11 years of doing that for the most trained people in the country. People who arrived already exceptional and left with something more. He thought about 23 civilians in a library community room in Crestwood, Oregon, who had walked in carrying fear they had been managing alone and walked out with something different. Not invulnerability. Nothing so simple. Something more honest than that. The knowledge that they were not starting from nothing. That the capacity to respond to danger was not the exclusive property of people who had been in combat or trained by the government or built a certain way. That it could be learned. That it could be chosen. That you could decide to be less afraid and then do the work, and it would actually help. Mia came to the fourth session. She had asked precisely and politely whether she was allowed, and Ethan had said yes, and she had sat in the back row with her notebook and listened with the focused attention she brought to things that interested her, which was most things, but especially things that connected to how the world actually worked underneath its surface. Afterward, in the truck on the way home, she was quiet for a while. "You're good at this," she said. "I know this material," he said. "No, I mean you're good at talking to people about it. The way you explain things. You don't make anyone feel stupid for not already knowing. You make them feel like knowing is possible." She looked at the window. "That's harder than knowing the material." He drove for a while. "Your grandmother used to say something," he said. "She said the measure of what you know is not what you can do with it yourself. It's what you can give away." Mia thought about that. She sounds like she was smart. "Remarkably," he said. "I wish I'd known her." "She would have adored you," he said. "She would have found you overwhelming in the best possible way." Mia almost smiled. Then she said, "Dad, the program. Are you going to keep doing it?" "Yes." "Are you going to expand it? Like other towns, not just Crestwood?" Hayes thinks so, eventually. "What do you think?" He considered it honestly. The way the program felt was not like work. It was not like the warehouse, which was fine and useful and sufficiently engaging. It was not like the SEAL training, which had been demanding and meaningful, but had existed at a distance from the life he was trying to build. It felt like something that belonged to both parts of him at once. The man who had spent 11 years understanding how danger worked, and the man who had spent 4 years building a quiet life around a 9-year-old who deserved every good thing. "I think yes," he said. "I think there's more to do." "Good," Mia said. "Then do it." 3 months after that first session, Officer Reyes showed up at a Thursday evening class. He did not come as a participant. He came as someone who had something to say, and had chosen this setting to say it, and he waited until after the session, and then walked up to Ethan with his hat in his hand, in the way of a man doing something that took a little courage. "I want to apologize," Reyes said. Ethan looked at him. "For what?" "That first night, at the warehouse. I told you how it usually goes. I basically told you that the system wasn't going to help you, and that you might want to consider paying them." He held Ethan's gaze steadily. "I was giving you accurate information about past patterns, but I think the way I said it communicated something I didn't intend. I think it communicated that we weren't going to try." "You tried," Ethan said. "Every time I called, you came." "That's the floor," Reyes said. "That's not enough." He paused. "Watching what you did, watching you document everything, fight it through the right channels, refuse to either capitulate or go further than necessary. It reminded me of what the job is supposed to look like from our side." Another pause. "I've filed 2 additional complaints against properties in the Vaughn portfolio that I had been letting sit. I thought you should know that." Ethan looked at him. "The Vaughns have been operating in this district for a long time," Reyes said. "Derek going down doesn't change that infrastructure. Gerald agreeing to stay away from you doesn't mean the pressure on other businesses stops." He put his hat back on. "I'm working on it." "Good," Ethan said. They shook hands. After Reyes left, Ethan locked up the community room and drove home and sat at the kitchen table after Mia was asleep in the quiet that he had always needed and had spent 4 years protecting and had almost lost and had kept. And he thought about the strange and circuitous path by which a man who had spent 11 years preparing others for the worst had ended up exactly here, doing something that looked from the outside nothing like what he was trained for and was from the inside precisely that. A year after the night. Derek Vaughn walked into Portside Logistics, and 6 months after the last Thursday session of the program's first run, Ethan sat in the bleachers at Mia's school for the 5th-grade science fair. Mia had built a working model of bioluminescent communication in ostracods. It involved a dark box, a UV light source, a microcontroller. She had programmed herself with help from a YouTube tutorial and approximately 47 questions, directed at Ethan, over the course of 3 weekends, and a presentation board that was by any objective measure the most detailed piece of work in the gymnasium. She stood next to it and explained it to the judges with the calm authority of someone who knows the material at a level that exceeds the requirements of the assignment. She explained how ostracods created blue light clouds in the water when a predator approached. She explained the dual theory warning signal for kin or predator confusion, possibly both. She explained the biological mechanism and the evolutionary advantage, and then in the final 30 seconds of her presentation, she said something that stopped the judges mid-note. She said, "The interesting thing about bioluminescence is that the light is only useful in the dark. The organism has to be in a dangerous place for the signal to mean anything. The light doesn't create the safety. It creates the awareness that allows survival to be possible." Ethan sat in the bleachers and heard that, and was quiet for a very long time. She won first place, which surprised no one who had been paying attention. Afterward in the parking lot, she found him standing next to the truck, and she was carrying the blue ribbon with the same matter-of-fact lack of drama she brought to her accomplishments. "You heard me," she said. It was not a question. She had seen his face. "I heard you," he said. "The bioluminescence part." "Yes." She looked at him. "I wasn't trying to make it about you. I was just saying what was true about the science." "I know," he said. "That's why it landed." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Dad, are you okay? Like actually okay? Not the way you say you are when you don't want me to worry." He looked at her. She was 10 now. She had been 10 for 3 weeks. She was still the most honest person in any room she occupied, and the room she occupied was growing. "I'm actually okay," he said. "That's not a hedge. I'm telling you what's true." She studied his face with the systematic thoroughness she brought to things that mattered. "Okay," she said, satisfied. "Let's go home. I'm hungry." They got in the truck. The harbor was somewhere behind them doing what it always did. The town was exactly what it had always been on the surface, ordinary and quiet, a strip of coastline that nobody famous had ever bothered to visit. But underneath the surface things had changed. A program met on Thursday evenings, and the room was never empty. A police officer was filing complaints he had left sitting. A young man named Ryan was back at work and no longer ashamed of the night he froze. A woman named Gloria was taking out her own trash in the dark. And a man who had spent 4 years making himself invisible was learning slowly that the visibility was not the thing he had feared it would be. He drove through the quiet streets with his daughter in the passenger seat, and she ate a granola bar from her backpack and talked about what she wanted for dinner. And he listened to her voice fill the truck cab the way it always did, completely fully, without leaving space for anything except itself. He thought about what she had said at the science fair. The light doesn't create the safety. It creates the awareness that allows survival to be possible. She had been talking about ostracods. She had been talking about him. She had been talking about every person who had ever sat in a dark room and made the choice to shine something into it. Not because the light guaranteed anything, but because awareness was the beginning of every other possible thing. That was what he was doing on Thursday evenings. That was what he had done in a parking lot in the middle of the night with 6 men who thought they had chosen a simple target. That was what Mia did every day, simply by being who she was, clear-eyed and direct, and unafraid of the truth of things, making her own light in whatever dark she found herself in, and trusting that it would be enough. He had walked away from the hardest job in the world to be her father. He had never for a single moment made the wrong call. Real strength was not what you could destroy. Every man who had ever come through his program and come out the other side understood that. The ones who made it, the ones who became what they were capable of being, they learned it in the hardest possible school. That capability without restraint was just damage, that power without purpose was just noise, and that the truest measure of what a man could do was not the worst he was capable of, but the best he chose. Ethan Walker had chosen. He had chosen every morning for 4 years, and he would choose again tomorrow and the day after, for as long as there was a girl in the passenger seat eating a granola bar and telling him what she wanted for dinner. For as long as there was a Thursday evening program in a library community room. For as long as there was a town that had decided slowly and without announcement that the quiet man 3 houses down was someone worth knowing. Not a warrior. A father. And in the end, that was the harder thing to be. The braver thing. The thing that required more from him than 11 years of professional danger ever had. Because any man can be ready for a fight. It takes something rarer to be ready for this. For the ordinary day. For the homework and the dinner and the bleachers and the blue ribbon and the granola bar in the passenger seat. For the voice that fills the whole truck. For the light that she made without knowing she was making it every single day.